When Midnight Suns was announced, I think there was a fair bit of confusion, intrigue, and worry. While FIRAXSIS is a trusted name in the gaming space thanks to their awesome XCOM series and more, turning that pedigree into a Marvel-themed adventure was a pretty tall order. After a few delays and a lot of build-up, I finally took a chance on this unlikely but definitely spectacular strategy RPG. Let me say right away that this game is pretty great. Awesome even? Perfect? Well, no, not perfect, but it's easily beyond anything I was expecting. A combat system that's addictive and rewarding, a shockingly large amount of interaction between the heroes, and a dopamine-filled progression loop that rolls between the two really makes a game that's pretty tough to put down. The story of Midnight Suns is an original tale set in the Marvel Universe. You play as the Hunter, child of Lilith. We're resurrected after Hydra brings our mother back into the human world to wreak havoc. Teaming up with the likes of the Avengers and the titular Midnight Suns, we set off to stop our estranged mother. The basic premise is quite comic booky, and I personally really love it for that. As the adventure progresses, we meet various other heroes in the Marvel Universe to join our cause. These range from modern mainstays that even the most casual observer would know, like Iron Man and Spidey. But there are also some lesser known ones like Nico or Robbie, one of the more newer Ghost Riders. That said, some of the choices in the roster will definitely leave the more dedicated Marvel fans scratching their heads. Given that the game pins itself on the supernatural side of the universe, you'd expect more of that catalog to appear. Characters like Captain Marvel, Captain America, Hulk, Wolverine, etc. are kind of odd ducks in the general story sense, but they completely make sense to keep things familiar. But while I admit I love them, I would have loved to see more magic or supernatural adjacent characters to be included.
I was terrified for him.
Personally, I felt like the story was really enjoyable. It rides between both original new events and mixing in some familiar ones. Stuff like fighting Venom in a bell tower has been shown a lot as a famous encounter in the Marvel Universe, but remixing it for an encounter here was pretty fun. I even like how they're fully aware that this isn't the first time that they've done this. Outside of the main story, there are various moments among the heroes, and it's a major part of the game. These are pretty hit or miss to me. On the one hand, I had little hesitation to skip over the story retreads. All the characters give their background and basic personality checklist talks in the beginning. For the indoctrinated like me, hearing Spider-Man's background for the billionth time isn't really needed. Of course, it's done for those who might not know, but some of these are really long-winded. Some of the original moments, once again, are pretty hit or miss. Personally, I really loved the fact that Blade has a crush on Captain Marvel, and it's a through line throughout the game. It's really cheesy and pointless, but that's what makes it fun. Sadly, that was more the exception than the rule. The other characters' through lines are really weak and obvious, like Spider-Man and Ghost Rider wanting to have their own DIY inventing corner, only for Iron Man to show up with all of his technology. There's a big kids versus adult or new guard versus old guard tone to things, and it's really unneeded and kind of out of character too.
Smart, quick-witted, fearless, hell, she even glows.
And do you find all of your allies equally impressive?
Yes. No. Wait, what are you trying to say?
Gameplay is a mixed bag in my opinion. The game has two different sides. A strategic and extremely satisfying combat, and then an explorable hub called the Abbey. One of these is so amazingly well done that it makes the other's flaws that much more apparent. Combat here is FIRAXSIS' bread and butter. They've proven themselves time and time again that they can make a combat system that's easy enough to understand, but deep enough to keep the player invested. Once again, they really nailed that. Somehow. The idea of Marvel SRPG being downright engaging and exciting moment to moment still blows my mind no matter how many hours I pour into this game. The attacks? Awesome. The animations? Great. The sound design? Perfect. The satisfying feel of setting them all off? second to none. It's seriously not a stretch to say that this has some of the most satisfying combat in an SRPG in recent years. Of course, that great feeling of watching well-planned attacks wouldn't matter if the tools and setup weren't good either. This is another thing that Midnight Suns really excels at. Combat is done through a card system. Each character has a handful of cards that make their deck. Now, I know it might turn some people off, but the decks are limited enough that you usually won't have to wait long to get what you really want, and the restrictions on builds keep you from walking into an impossible situation. This simplicity really helps keep the pace of fights brisk, but nonetheless filled with tons of meaningful decisions throughout the game. There's a sheer variety here as well in what characters can do that just keeps them all so interesting to use. For example, Blade is a heavy hitter who can cause bleed damage. Magic, on the other hand, is all about moving enemies around the field to put them where you want for big brain setups. Captain America is a tank who can taunt enemies and can block a ton of attacks. This whole team setup theory crafting is a really fun part of the experience. And while the randomized cards will keep you on your toes to choose the best ideas to execute at the time with what you have. I really cannot praise this part of the game enough. The battlegrounds are simple but filled with interesting ways to set up and execute attacks as well. There are many objects to use in the battleground, like exploding barrels, crates to jump over, and railings to knock enemies off of. All of these objects really gave an extra layer of things to think about and exploit while fighting. Even better, they never really felt out of place gameplay-wise, even if it was a little weird that Hydra keeps leaving so many crates around. Battles play out in turns. Players get to use cards, redraw, move characters, items, and so on. When you've exhausted all of your options, you end your turn and the enemy will attack. After enemies move, they will summon reinforcements, usually. These extra enemies are used to keep the flow of combat going since there are two types of cards. Free ones, and then there are cards that cost heroism. Heroism is gained through actions and KOing enemies. Stronger abilities or objects in the environment cost heroism to use. This system works really well, and it felt like the board was constantly shifting and turning in ways that kept it really interesting. There's also a decent variety of missions here as well, which I really liked. It's not always defeat all enemies. Sometimes it can be rescue civilians, get items, stop a truck, and so on. It's really great to have the main objectives vary to keep things challenging throughout its length. One gripe I did have though is that the random boss encounters and side missions. Bosses can reappear after their story moments in random side quests to really mix things up. They can turn a quick resource run into a protracted unwanted encounter. Challenging, sure, but more like annoying. It gives you a lot to chew on, but not in an overbearing way. Once again, satisfaction is the word I would use for this. It feels good to pick a team. It feels good to set off abilities. It feels good to manipulate the situation in your favor. It feels good to open a portal with Ghost Rider, kick an enemy into it with Captain America. It just feels good to play, and downright amazing when you get the perfect big brain setup. One big gripe here though is the lack of enemy variety. You're going to fight a lot of the same enemies, and this makes sense because it's Hydra, but I really would have liked to see more enemy types in this game. So the combat is basically perfect, but let's talk about the Abbey. This hub acts as your in-between missions area. At its core, you'll be spending a lot of time here doing the pre-mission setup, checking your deck, unlocking new abilities and features, talking to characters, and so on. None of this is too far outside of expectations. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of hero interaction here that can be really hit or miss. Some of the events are way more interesting than others, but in general, I think just the way they're presented is way too uninteresting. There's no unique dynamic things happening, usually just characters stiffly talking to each other. Occasionally, some of the conversations are fun, but that's not often. This hub is also where you get your new abilities and more. Cards are unlocked in a random booster pack style, with several being choosable at a time. I felt like this worked out really well since more often than not, the game seemed to prioritize giving you new cards instead of ones you've already gotten. So I was never really left wanting in this regard. And once you have a card, you can equip it instantly in your deck if you want. Also, shoutouts for highlighting which heroes have new cards. It's really helpful. The hub's functions in general expand as you progress too. Things like more cards and boosters, redraws, mods, customizations, background buffs, and more are all here. I was really happy that almost all of the requirements for these were really normal progression style things that I didn't really need to focus too much on. Things like use Wolverine 3 times in a mission was going to happen naturally, so I would often have the requirements already met well in advance. I really like the structure here because there's a rhythm of the tasks that you need to do before a mission. What takes way too long in the opening tutorial moments only takes a few short minutes later. And there's a feeling of constantly having things to progress on too that really helps. Another aspect of the Abbey is the Abbey grounds. This is a big map that is fully explorable, and I kind of hate it. Well, hate's a strong word. The grounds have a litany of items, collectibles, unlockables, story bits, and more to find. All of which are optional. It feels really similar to Mortal Kombat's Crypt if you're familiar with it. But I honestly didn't really enjoy being in this area all that much. It's interesting for sure to have an area of exploration and puzzles to unlock chests, doors, and gaming loot, but it's so less tuned, so to speak. It's fine. Yeah, it's fine. I should also say that you'll spend a lot of time here. I'd say maybe 40 to 50% of my playtime was in the hub area just listening to conversations or skipping through them between missions. Doing the loop of pre-fight tasks for a minute or two, then a mission finally, it just felt really bloated and unnecessary personally. I appreciate the effort, but I think I would have preferred a smaller scope hub with more interesting things happening in it. Also, it just doesn't look great visually. It's quite bland compared to the combat and its arenas.
Because you are accountable for what you make.
Exactly. It's the mark of my trade. Whatever I make has to live up to the
Speaking of visuals in Midnight Suns, they're both good and bad at the same time. In combat, the characters and arenas really show off the game in its full glory. They really do look great, especially when big attacks are going off. And the sound design is really nice too. Where things fall apart is the Abbey once again. It's just a bland area and the characters are pared way back visually. They also have this really stiff presence to them too. It looks almost a generation behind. And then there are the pre-rendered cutscenes. Some of them are really weird. In the opening, for example, it's oddly cropped with black borders, and none of them are even high resolution on PlayStation 5. Thankfully though, on PlayStation 5 at least, the combat runs smooth as butter. There are some stutters in the Abbey, but I can deal with that personally. Lastly, I did encounter some bugs with this one. One of them is massive and completely unacceptable. Occasionally, after doing the team setup and loop of tasks, I would try to manually save before a mission, and boom, the game would crash. I had this happen several times and I could replicate it even. It's completely unacceptable. The only way past it was to go past this part of the game until it autosaved again, and thankfully the game autosaves quite often. Other than that, the bugs I encountered were minor. Occasionally seeing through the floor in the Abbey, weird physics, UI elements not showing up properly, or others not going away when they were supposed to, they all existed, but they weren't a hindrance. So Midnight Suns is an absolute win in my book. I do feel like the adventure is a little too bloated with features in between battles. The Abbey is a novel idea, but when I think about the amount of time I spent there, there's a disconnect that I can't really ignore. The various long-winded and all too familiar stories, paired with no presentation flair to leave you engaged, really aren't this game's strong suit. I would have loved to see these be more condensed and intimate. To contrast it though, is a combat system that is pure satisfaction. From start to end of the game, it just kept my interest on this side. You feel powerful, intelligent, and just downright awesome when you're utilizing all the game's mechanics to their fullest. The simple but deep style it went for was an absolute hit with me, and I think anyone who's an SRPG fan would really be missing out if they didn't try this one. So for all the Marvel and SRPG fans out there, Midnight Suns is an easy recommendation. Its positives definitely outweigh my personal negatives with the game and made it a surprise hit of 2022. It might even be one of my favorite games of the year. But that's going to be it for this one, guys. Please like, sub, hit the bell, I guess? I'm not sure what that does exactly, but everyone says it. Are you going to be knuckle deep in a Hydra agent this holiday season like me, or are you going to wait a bit? Let me know down in the comments below, or drop by my Twitch where I play games like this and more live. Have a good time out there and stay safe. I hope to see you again next time.
Midnight Suns assemble. Or whatever.
Yes. Midnight Suns assemble or whatever.
Why not?